Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Yamhill County Truth Seeker Conversations in the Spirit of Truth. We have a returning guest. I'm very pleased to welcome back McMinnville City Councilman Chris Chenoweth. Welcome back, Chris, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Anytime. There's so much going on in this city, and who else but you to let us know what's happening. Today, we're going to be talking about two things. First, the proposed new McMinnville Fire District, and then about the pending navigation center for the houseless to be built in McMinnville. First, the Fire District. Now, Chris, I think you know that I recently interviewed McMinnville City Council President Adam Garvin and McMinnville Professional Firefighters Union President Todd Godfrey, and they explained their views on the need for a change in how our fire department operates, and they described how the taxing and financial end would work if the voters approve of this change in the election on May 16th. Just gonna open it up to you. What is your perspective on this?
So I want to try to be very clear in a situation in which I find myself very conflicted. I have endorsed this measure in the voters pamphlet, and I support the redistricting. The concern that I have, I don't want to hold the fire department hostage because of the mismanagement of the city. I don't think that's a fair position to put the fire department in.
Wow, that's a loaded statement, though. Are you going to explain what you mean by that?
Yes.
Okay.
So for many years, the fire department has been underfunded. And there are times where the need for revenue, the fire department is used as a political football, as it were, to try to get the revenue that's needed for the city. And I think that's a normal way of operations for most city governance. And so while we, the city council, of which I have been a dissenting vote on most of these issues, have passed a ton of new taxes, and while we, the city council, are apt to keep $1.50 per thousand in fees, or in property tax authority that could stay in our budget, and I don't like any of that. I also don't want to hold the best interest of the fire department hostage,
right,
because of the increase in taxes that the city council has done. The best thing for the fire department, in my opinion, is to get them free of the city and get them into a district. I do believe we have underfunded them. I think $1.50 per thousand, given the percentage of paid fire department individuals as compared to volunteers, is just not adequate. We should be closer to $2 per thousand, and that's what they're going. So I think that's a needed increase for the fire department. And I think that if we don't get that, our fire department is not anywhere near what it needs to be. Right now, we're tapping out way too often to bring emergency medical service from either Tualatin Valley or Sheridan to help our residents. And if I'm a good city councilor, I've got to say that's not in the best interest of my constituents. So it's a tough place to be, because I don't want the $1.50 per thousand that the city's going to keep in taxing authority. I don't want us to have. So I'm agreeing to help the fire department, while I'm also agreeing to a situation that could result in much more taxation on the citizens. And I'm not sure, that makes me very conflicted. But at the end of the day, I don't want to hold the fire department hostage.
Well, maybe off camera, I'll pick apart what's the background behind that, because it sounds kind of sticky to me. And I'm in support of anything that can help the fire department as well. I mean, it sounded like they're in dire straits, and maybe it really wasn't their fault, but now we need to do what we need to do to keep moving forward. I'm trying to paraphrase what I heard you say, but there
Right.
was this whole $1.50 is connected to it, but it sounds like it's not going to be part of the city anymore, even though the city is part of this collection,
So
right?
let me be clear. Ballot the way taxing authority works for
Hmm.
cities is they have a fixed taxing authority that they can levy on your property taxes. The city of McMinnville has $5.03 or $5.06. I can never remember which one it is per thousand that we can levy. Every budget cycle, we determine what portion of that we're actually going to levy.
Hmm.
Currently, of that $5 and a few cents, a buck 50 is going to the fire department. When the fire district is recreated, they'll have their own new levy of $2 per thousand, and the McMinnville city will, or city of McMinnville, will still have its $5 and so much per thousand. So in essence, that buck 50 that they're currently paying for the fire department will just fall back as taxing authority, still available to the city to tax and use on whatever they want to use.
Got it.
That's where I'm conflicted. I don't. That's a ton of money. If the city releases or doesn't release it, but doesn't assess that $1.50, then this fire district is only a 50-cent increase per thousand for the consumer.
Hmm.
If the city assesses that $1.50, then this fire district is at $2 per thousand.
Got it.
And to be clear, currently the city council has assured everyone that we will not do anything for at least a year, and then we will take input from the community on what, if anything, we will do with that $1.50.
Got it. All right. I was going to ask if this was going to be addressed down the road. Sounds like it is. So the positives thing is that we could have a new fire district, which has all kinds of great things going for it, but this sticky part hopefully will get addressed, and I'm sure you will help make that happen in city council meetings at some point.
I'm going
Uh,
to do my dead level best, and if I can't do it via city council meetings, then maybe we'll have to look at an initiative
mm,
petition
mm,
that requires a vote of the people before the city of McMinnville assesses any of that $1.50.
there you go. Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that and looking out for everybody. Second topic, the navigation center. These are big topics everywhere: homelessness, houselessness. You hear it. It's coming from the state of Oregon as like a top focus. And Mayor Drabkin has reportedly found the funds to build what's called a low barrier navigation center. I'm tempted to just let you express your opinions on this whole thing without a whole lot of questions, although I do have some questions I may bring up if you don't address them directly. Have you seen the mayor's plan or anybody's plan for how this would actually operate or
So,
look?
so first off, navigation centers were a product of a House bill back in 2021
Hmm.
that Ron Noble, our former House rep here in this area, was a co-sponsor on. And those navigation centers are designed to be a low barrier shelter, but they do have some basic requirements. So they're not a no barrier. It is a
Got it.
low barrier. And the way in which these were described or defined in the House bill is they had to be run by a nonprofit organization that has experience
Mm.
doing such work. And so in Yamhill County, that's YCAP. And YCAP is the folks that will actually own the navigation center and operate the navigation center. So it's not really Remy's plan, it's YCAP's plan.
Ah.
Uh, YCAP and I sat down with the executive director and their chief, and I think it was their financial officer, although I'm not sure who the second person's title was, earlier this week and had a long conversation about that. And I will say I walked away from it feeling a little better. As you may or may not know, we already have a hotel that is housing folks on the south end of town. It was
Yep.
converted from a hotel to a 30-day temporary shelter.
Got it.
Um, Basically, the process, I'm gonna oversimplify this. So anybody who understands the whole process, you feel free to comment underneath that Chris oversimplified this, and here's more details. Um, but essentially, the idea with a navigation center is you have a low barrier shelter with beds, and you also have services and people who can connect you to services present at the place of contact, so that when these folks come in and get a bed, they're not just getting a bed. They're getting a bed with some requirements and some direction to bring them to the next level in the process of bringing them into full-time housing. And so the next level is the hotel at the south end of town.
Mm.
Um, that with that in that hotel, they're actually providing many services, including life skills training, and various other services to help holistically treat the person, so that then they can take them from that and put them into a apartment or wherever they can find more permanent housing for the individual they're trying to, or family they're trying to help. Um, so it should be a stepping stone. It's not going to be low barrier in the sense that we think of, or at least I think of. When I think of low barrier, I think of a place where it doesn't matter. They can be whatever they want, do whatever they want, kind of facility. That's not what this is going to be. There are some basic requirements. They're not going to be allowed to take drugs there. They're not going to be turned away if they're on drugs, but they're not going to be allowed to take drugs there. And that's the same way it is at the hotel at the south end of town. So it's not as bad as maybe some folks might first think. And it's also not, I have some hope that it will do some good, because there will be services provided at the point of contact, which is something that most low barrier shelters are basically just beds.
So help me understand, is the new proposed construction phase one that leads to the hotel that currently exists, or are they both kind of the same? We're just getting an additional one?
No, the hotel right now is like the next step in a process, right? It's like the middle step without a low barrier shelter. So we need the low barrier shelter for the first contact. And from what I understand, YCAP is going to be putting most of their caseworkers in that same building. The offices for the caseworkers, as I understand it, and this is, I may not be 100% accurate here, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. That the offices for those that do casework for YCAP will be located in the same building where the beds are at the low barrier shelter, which will provide them with the ability to really assess where these individuals are at in their circumstances, and help figure out where the best place to put them is, whether it's in that hotel, whether it's, maybe there's a family member they can connect them to, whatever the dynamics are of that individual. I'm not going to try to guess all the options, because each story is different, but they will assess it, figure out the best course of action. And the majority, yes, would transition after a day or two to the hotel, and then after 30 days to a apartment complex. My understanding is right now they're having phenomenal success with that hotel. That's called Project Turnkey, if you want to look that up online.
Okay.
And my understanding is they're having phenomenal success. They're not really dealing much with the drug addicted or the mentally ill there. The reality is housing first models don't work for drug addicted, mentally ill, or dual diagnosis. And housing first means we give them a place to stay, so that the pressure of not having a house is taken off them, and then they can heal with the other wounds they've got to heal with, so they can move on to actually being a functioning member of society. That model works really well in a lot of scenarios, particularly with those who want help. With those that don't want help, which a lot of times is the mentally ill and drug addicted or dual diagnosis, it doesn't work hardly at all. And so recent statistics say that 74% of those you physically see on the street homeless, are mentally ill, drug addicted, or dual diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to have to find a solution for that. And that's one of my real concerns in all of this is we seem to be not focusing on the mentally ill. And I don't know what it's going to take to get the legislature to realize we've got to do something for the mentally ill. That has to be a huge focus of what we're doing. Until we do, we're just putting a Band-Aid on the visible problem that we see.
Well, some of these have been, and thank you, that was a great explanation. Some of these have been going on for quite a while. I think they're in various states, in various types that are similar. Any idea what the success rate is for this, or recidivism? I suppose it's probably related to the criteria you were talking about for people with dual diagnosis and serious drug addiction. I'm supposing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real low percentage of those folks that get helped. I mean, that's just a reality. I think until society has a real hard conversation about going back to the days of involuntary commitment of the mentally ill to some living arrangement where they are taken care of, we're going to have a visible component that is unhelpable. And that's hard wording. A lot of people really don't like that, but I think there's more and more people on both sides of the aisle that are coming around to the realization that it's inhumane to allow somebody who literally cannot take care of themselves, who will not take their medications, to live on the street, and suffer with schizophrenia or whatever mental illness they're suffering with, because we refuse to say, you must be in this facility where you can have heat and a bed and food and be taken care of. If it's a sad situation, if I were on the street today in mentally ill, my mother, who's still alive, could commit me somewhere. She could take power of attorney. She could go through the process and she could do that. But if you're homeless and you have no family that's willing to do that, there's nothing we can do. They just live on the streets. And to me, that's inexcusable. That's just inexcusable.
So it sounds like there's a big gap in our procedures so far. Even if all these things happen, we're not really taking care of. We may not see the improvement or fewer people sleeping on the street. That about right?
You might. I don't know. I mean, with 74% of those that you see on the street being drug addicted, mentally ill, or dual diagnosis, I have some skepticism as to how much these folks were actually going to get off the street with our current policies. I see this as a Band-Aid for that group of people. I don't see this as a solution for that group of people. And we've spent an awful lot of money on Band-Aids and have not come up with a real solution. Having said that, I think the navigation centers are a huge step up. I don't know if they've been tried in other parts of the country. If they have, I'm not aware of the statistics on them. But the concept of having a full caseworker at the low barrier shelter, I think is relatively, while it seems like that's kind of a no-brainer, I think it's relatively new.
And not every treatment program is very effective either. I think I was talking with George Humley about this a couple months ago, and the one that I know of that works is Teen Challenge. For those who are willing to attend, you attend for a year, but you get immersed in the Bible, and you have a foundation. It's kind of like the 12-step programs where they're working with a form of deity to help them, but these are more direct. It's just straight Christianity. So I don't know if the church and state could work together on that, but that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Well, as a believer, I do believe that we have to heal the whole person. Feeding a person and taking care of their physical needs is one component of the human person, but there's also the spiritual component of the human person. And if we're not healing that in the process, we're coming up short of what's needed to really bring them to where they need to be. And so I do think the church plays a role. That's one of the things with programs like YCAP is doing, that is it's missing that component,
Mm,
because most of its funding is coming from public sources, and there's some limitations. Not public sources do allow faith-based organizations to help, but there are some limitations there.
right.
So yeah, I mean, I have skepticism. I'm grateful to see something being done, um, that has some promise and isn't the same thing we've been doing for the last 15 years. Having said that, I don't know where you wanted to go with this, but fentanyl is one of our big problems right now. And
Right.
until we get a grasp of the fentanyl problem in our country, the numbers of homeless are going to continue to increase,
Mm.
because a lot of these are drug addicted individuals, either to other forms of opiates or to fentanyl. Um, and that's at a crisis point.
It
So
is. And I was discussing with Lucetta Elmer not too long ago about how I consider this a border issue. We're all every state in the United States is a border state now because I think I've heard 7 million have come across and unvetted, and there's tons and tons of drug traffic. I don't know how much we can do here in Oregon about that until the border is closed.
the border is definitely an issue. I was watching, or listening to, I should say. One of the things I do, and I know this makes me very weird, but when I'm working on computers during the day, I go to YouTube and pull up whatever House hearings or Senate hearings I
Hmm.
can I can play, and just let that play while I'm working, so I can listen to the hearings and kind of get a feel for what's going on at the federal level. And I was listening to a hearing on fentanyl, and there was no argument from either side of the political aisle or from the witnesses that were in front of them that predominantly fentanyl is coming from two, um, um, and my brain just went blank. Two,
Sources.
well, no, it's not
China
sources.
and
Two,
Mexico.
no, it's all coming from Mexico. Two cartels. That's the word I was looking
Oh,
for.
right,
Two
right. Sorry.
Mexican cartels are responsible for the almost all of the fentanyl trafficking that's occurring over the border. They sometimes use immigrants coming over the borders. They sometimes use American citizens coming over the border. But regardless, it's all coming from two cartels. Now they have to get the ingredients to make it, and that a lot of that's coming from China. So they're
Right.
buying the ingredients from China, bringing it to Mexico, making the fentanyl in Mexico, and then shipping it over to the border to the United States. Um, and so, yes, and we're going to have a continual stream coming in here. What we can do and what we need to do, and I'm going to do my dead level best to get involved in helping to make this happen, is we have got to do a better job informing our kids. Our kids have got to be made aware that it's no longer you may try something and get hooked. It's now you may try something and end up dead. And
Hmm.
that is a scary situation. I grew up, most people don't know my background, but I was in the drug scene as a teenager and early 20 something person. I know the drug scene. I understand what it's about. I lived it. I was somebody who went couch to couch surfing. I was not um, the person you see today. And I can tell you the realities of the drug scene in the late 80s, early 90s, comparative to the realities of what these our kids growing up right now are experiencing, are two entirely different things.
Way worse.
It's scary. I mean,
Yeah.
in my day, people overdosed because they were sticking a needle in their arm. Today, a person can take a pill they think is Percocet, that's labeled as Percocet, and it's not Percocet, it's fentanyl, and it kills them. Uh, it was 60 or 70,000 people in the last year died to fentanyl overdoses. That's more than accidents on the road.
Mm.
This is a it's a major pandemic. It's worse than oxycodone and Oxycontin. It's something that we've got to warn our kids: stay away from trying drugs. You don't know what you're getting. I mean, one of the biggest problems I had as a young person is I tried marijuana and it didn't do anything bad. So then I just thought, well, you know what? You guys all lied to me. It's not a big deal.
Gateway drug.
Yeah, well, gateway in the sense because once you take it, you get told it's so bad, and then you try it and it's not bad.
And
So
you're
then,
hanging around with people who have other drugs. I have a past as well, so I know exactly
yeah,
what you're
and
talking
so
about.
if that was okay, everything else must be okay. Well, we got to tell kids today, you don't think that way because it's the glass jar filled with a bunch of little pills. Some of those pills may be fine, and I'm going to tell you some of those pills may be fine. They may just give you a little high, but some of those pills may kill you, and it didn't used
Hmm.
to be that way.
Well, the
Um,
education of our, at least children and students still in school, and maybe campaigns around town for those who are already out and experimenting, because I think there's a lot of adults dying or being affected by this as well. It's going to have to be pretty effective. Maybe I'll figure out a way to do something production wise on this show to make it dramatic, but that's a tough one.
it's a real tough one, and but I think we have to make sure we have no control at the border. So we need to focus on what we do have control over,
Right.
and that's trying to get a really strong campaign of messaging out to our young people. The adults, we can try to message to them, but their adults are going to do what they're going to do. And they're reading the news or listening to the news, watching the news, reading the paper. They know what's going on.
Mm,
It's kids that are more susceptible to peer pressure and
mm,
um, trying something because they've never tried it before. And what's the big deal? It's just a little pill.
yeah.
Um, so that's a passion because like I said, you said you had a past, so you probably understand where I'm coming from. I just don't want to see. I mean, listening to these hearings was heartbreaking. It was parent after parent of young kids that were good kids that just tried a pill at a party.
Mm,
That was and yes, there's adults too. I think what was it, a month ago? We had 7 people hit the emergency room at Mac Hospital at
mm.
1:30 in the morning. All of them overdosed in some level or another. Um,
It's horrible.
yeah. So
Well, I do, just for myself, would like to say that we as voters can do something about the border in 2024, depending on who becomes president. But here in just our local scene, you're right. We have to do something, and that's it's better than doing nothing at all, for sure. Um, there was some other things I was going to talk about. Some things that naysayers have said about navigation centers and just making these shelters in general,
mhm.
but I may just skip those because they the thing you just said about the drugs and addiction and not being effectively addressed by them wouldn't really solve that problem. So that's a whole other thing. I might just cut that out because there was actually some very interesting things. Let me scroll here. I'll just.
Oh, feel free and hit me with the naysayer comments. Because I am not, like I said, I'm skeptical. We'll see how they do. Um,
All right. So here's one. Oh, okay. Individuals who, this may not be, let me see. Individuals who won't be accessing the existing shelter services may not be motivated to change. That's one. So, I mean, you got people who don't go to the new center, then, and if they don't want to go, then we're missing, I don't know how many people we would miss unless, what's your thought on that?
well, I like to use the family analogy. I think you in uh, every study I've ever read says the most balanced and well adjusted children come out of homes where you have a mother and a father. Um, and um, and the reason for that is you need both a nurturer and
Mm,
a disciplinarian. If you
mm,
have both, you come out of balance one way or another. Um, and so I look at the navigation center, the hotel at the south end of town, all the different food programs. This is the nurturer. All of this is the nurturer. If we don't have the disciplinarian to go along with that, we're missing the component that will help motivate to remove them from the streets. When it comes to drug addicted, like I said, I live the lifestyle. I can tell you, people don't change until they reach their rock bottom, whatever that rock bottom is, and it's different for each and every human being. Um, but to get to that rock bottom, if you're meeting all of their needs, you're providing them with food, you're providing them with housing, you're providing them with everything they need, they're not going to reach that rock bottom. So there has to come a point, and I think the phrase in the 80s was tough love.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be that side of things that we're doing. That's the role of the police. That's the role of the city codes and enforcement. That's the role of the DAs. There has to be some tough love, or everything else we're doing won't work. It requires a stick and a love, and we don't seem to be willing in our society today to use the stick.
Well, the way law enforcement is people are pressing for it to be less rather than more. That just feeds right into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. They're in a tough position. I wouldn't want to be a police officer today.
No way. It'd be really hard. So here's another naysay for a shelter like this. It makes it easier for people experiencing homelessness who to just encourages more people to come to the place where that center is. And then you just have more homeless.
And I don't disagree with that. That's a skepticism I have. If you build it, they will come. And I do worry that that's going to be the end result, that we're just going to end up shipping in a bunch of Portland's problems, or a bunch of Eugene's problems, or a bunch of Salem's problems as we build out. And that's a reality that I don't see as avoidable if we're going to continue down this path of trying to provide the best services we can.
Here's another one. These services are costing too much money for no tangible benefit. And I realize the one we're putting together right now, at least the building itself, is coming from recovery money from the federal government. But what's to sustain this after that's gone? You don't have to. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you're spot on. And the other problem that I see is that we're building $1 billion enterprise in taking care of the homeless, right? The more facilities we build, the more money that we're giving to nonprofits. I mean, in McMinnville, this navigation center alone is going to cost a little over $3 million by the time it's said and done. And that doesn't include the staffing of it. That's just building the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start staffing it and paying for employees, and whoops, sorry about that. Back up.
Don't do drugs.
Once we start staffing it and we start doing the employees and the training and all of the necessary equipment that in order to maintain the facility, we're literally building a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar enterprise in taking care of the homeless. And once you build such a complex, it's hard to tear it back down.
Although I will say, Chris, that I did read about some other programs. One actually was a law in California how these are supposed to run. And there's some time limits. It's 60 to 90 days max. There has to be a home type of setting for them to progress to. I did hear also this morning on a news channel that Portland, I don't know where they got all the money, but they have built, I believe they've already built tons of affordable homes that will only cost $600 a month for rent, etc. And beat their timeline and made more than they thought they would make. So it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, but once you build an industry, that industry will try to keep itself alive.
It feeds itself. That's right.
Exactly. And so yes, I think your comment also touched on my concern, which is we're not addressing the real underlying issue of a lot of the visible homeless, which is mental illness. We're throwing money at fixing today's need. It's kind of like a prescription drug. We're dealing with the surface issue, and we're not dealing with the actual underlying issue, which is either mental illness. It's also spiritual. That's a
Yeah.
component to
Oh,
the
for sure.
underlying issue. We're not addressing that. And so we're not
Hmm.
fixing the
Yeah.
problem. Um, that is really concerning to me. The success rate I know of Project Turnkey, I think is right around 21%. That's good, but that's 79% failure rate.
Wow.
I'm saying Turnkey statewide. I'm not talking Project Turnkey McMinnville. I've been told it's
Okay.
much higher success rate here.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
but still, I mean, you're talking about a system that doesn't. There's no 100%. There's no magic pill to this. Um, so, yeah, the question is, how much are we just throwing at the problem, and how much are we really solving the problem?
Well, I really do think, and George mentioned this, that at least some churches need to somehow get involved and be available as a conduit for those who would consider getting the spiritual end treated. I mean, that would, I'm guessing that if they did, there would be a much higher success rate, just because I believe God is very powerful at changing lives, just like mine. So I got another one. Encouraging high barrier individuals to congregate in urban areas increases crime and decreases public safety. So the question would be, I guess, could these be somewhere other than urban, like not in the middle of town?
So one of the problems with House Bill 2005, I think, was the bill that got navigation centers into Oregon. I think that was the number. It was, like I said, 2021. Um, is that the wording of it said cities must have these,
Oh,
have a nonprofit that meets a whole series of requirements. And so while I agree with the concern, the state legislature has mandated that regardless of the code for the area where the nonprofit wants to locate it, the cities must allow it to be built. Um, I
wow.
would say there is some argument where this one's going to go is within a few blocks of the police department and the fire department. So there's some arguments at what better place to put it, but right next to where emergency services of all types are immediately available.
Okay, sure. Wow. Well, this is, we're not done with this topic for sure. There's a lot going to be happening, and it's awesome that you are as informed on it as you are, and I appreciate it. If you have no further comments,
I'd like to share a little story.
okay.
Sometimes I think people look at somebody who's in office and they don't see a human being; they see a political caricature. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that it's important to understand we're talking about real human beings who have hearts, who care, who are focused on trying to do what's best for the community. Um, Years ago, there was a young man that I became aware of that God laid on my heart, and I went and told me, you need to go see what's going on with him. So I went to where he was living. He was I think 17 at the time, living away from his parents in a trailer um, next to a business where he was working at the time. Um, he hadn't been to work for a few days. I didn't know that when I felt this, but he hadn't been to work for a few days. And the employer was getting concerned. So I went and knocked on his door and heard um, um, uh, sounds that were of somebody who wasn't healthy. So I let myself in. He was running 102 fever. He'd been sick with the flu, hadn't eaten for days, and was in a really bad shape. Um, so I basically picked him up, took him home to my house, and my wife and I nursed him back to health. Mostly my wife. I'm not good at that kind of thing. But nursed him back to health. He lived with us for a couple, 3 years. And eventually his brother, he had a younger brother. His younger brother came and lived with him. We got him a place. He got an apartment, got him going the right direction. Today, both him and his younger brother are very successful businessmen, one in Tualatin, one here in McMinnville. very strong members of the community, I give them high marks for what they've become. And it was all from my perspective, God laid him on my heart and said, you better go check in on this kid. He was homeless. This was what the church does.
Yeah.
The church's way of helping the homeless may not be always opening a shelter or creating a pantry where they can come get some free food, or cooking for a whole herd of folks that are homeless. It may not be something that is as visible as people want to think or have in their mind it is. It may just be one or two at a time, reaching out, opening their house, bringing them into their home and helping them to get their feet back underneath them while ministering to their spirit. And I think that's
Amen.
something that gets missed.
For sure. So that would require we believers to really listen to what God's telling us and not shoo it off, but go toward it. And no matter what the potential pain would be, I'm going to bring a scripture in here. Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. So there is a calling, and you did it. That's a tough one for someone to think of doing. But you knew him, so that's helpful. Maybe just all of us getting together and talking about it, and maybe making a plan for those who might be more approachable, talking about Christians or non-Christians working together.
Well, I think we're helping more than people realize the church is helping. And that's kind of the reason for the story, is that we think of it in terms of programs.
Right.
But Christ thinks of it in terms of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And so there may be a lot more help that's occurring by the churches in the community than most people are aware.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice to highlight that.
Yeah.
Maybe we will. Chris, thank you so much for everything you do, for your heart, your spirit, and your hard work with the city. Blessings, as always, and take care. And maybe we should schedule something for the near future, but we'll see how that goes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me and giving me an opportunity to share my heart.
Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of these United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to my country I make my pledge to always love, protect, and defend her. And we the people across this land, one nation